Thanks to Sony for the review code, and thanks to my Patreon supporters for making videos like this possible, as well as exclusive videos you can only get over there for as little as $1 a month. Thanks, and now on with the show. Propaganda, by its very nature, is designed to distort reality, to varnish it to the extent that the painting of simple solutions to complicated problems, politically convenient enemies, or just that there isn't anything to worry about at all of it can sway a populace in favour of the propagandist's ideology, often in spite of how obviously such a picture fails to line up with reality. And when it comes to art, few big-name directors have honed in on this discrepancy quite as intensely over the years as Paul Verhoeven, with many of his most seminal films contrasting about as directly as is possible the carefully curated, corporate-friendly image of the world as seen on the television screen, and the utter dysfunction and rot that such corporate, profit-over-humanity thinking has unleashed on the society outside those boundaries. And look, I know it might seem a bit silly of me to be talking so seriously when I'm about to go into Helldivers 2, a game where, even if you can get past the dreaded server at capacity screen, the goofiness of its alien squishing action makes for truly emergent, player-driven comedy, but trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. It's for that very reason that I think Helldivers 2 might be the best, most convincing pastiche of Verhoeven's Starship Troopers that I have ever played. For context, I'm willing to bet most would recognise Verhoeven's 1997 sci-fi adaptation to be his most prominent interrogation into the workings of propaganda. It's a film where seemingly nothing exists but the ambition to go to war. Given that military service guarantees citizenship, people might be using their service in the war to move on to different things in their lives, but at the centre of it all is war. A conflict whose progress is constantly communicated to the denizens of this world, themselves indoctrinated from every angle by the need to liberate humanity from the scourge of an alien threat that, thanks to the tireless efforts of brave soldiers, humanity will definitely win out against. But they need your help to do it. Such is your civic duty, one that everyone else takes up gladly. That is, until the soldiers exit those ships on Clandathu and the unvarnished reality of the situation really kicks in which countless human lives are meaninglessly flung into a meat grinder so ferocious that the resultant goop veers over into outright camp. It's a scenario in which the scale of devastation is shown, but the framing of it at the very least gives the impression that you might not be getting the full picture here, that there is a very specific reason why it's being presented this way. In line with Verhoeven's staggeringly difficult to miss satire of fascism, it's a far cry from the narrative simplicity of the triumphant good humanity versus bad alien appeal to emotion as seen in the Federation's messaging about the war. A situation where you might find yourself asking, what is it these soldiers are actually achieving here? But just because we as an audience have witnessed the far uglier truth of the matter doesn't mean that the associated propaganda just stops, that the soldiers stop buying into it. In fact, the lie seems so obvious that it comes across as downright silly. It's very deliberately played for laughs. And indeed, with all of that context in mind, it's pretty easy to see that Helldivers owes so much of its shtick to Verhoeven's film, from its visual design, the look of its suits and the quadruped lizard-like aliens, to its quip-filled dialogue, that as someone who didn't play the first game, I was wholly convinced that I was looking at an official Troopers adaptation during the game's reveal at last year's State of Play, right up until that logo appeared. And with all the game's talk of liberty, its intro's idyllic suburbanism juxtaposed with horrific violence from a presumably invading force, the fact you can barely hear the Helldivers talk about how they're peacekeepers over the incessant blasts of their machine gun fire, the game might as well have its characters turn to the camera and say, I'm doing my part. And while the Earth of Starship Troopers is explicitly not a democracy, the sheer repetitive frequency frequency with which the aliens are reminded that all these bullets and explosions are a taste of democracy would become utterly irritating if it didn't serve such an obvious thematic purpose. Indeed, the entire script is filled to bursting with the kind of hoorah machismo that, identically to the film, indicates a confidence and preparedness for the conflict ahead that will completely crumble the second boots hit the ground. But, you know, it's one thing to parrot just the visual cues and quips of Verhoeven's film. What really interests me about Helldivers specifically is how it manages to convey the heart of the film's satire through its wonderfully frantic gameplay mechanics. See, Starship Troopers has us spend a whole bunch of time in school and training facilities to illustrate just how widespread this indoctrination is, how deeply its characters have internalized it and bought into it, so that all this preparation can act as setup for the punchline that in this conflict, preparedness might not matter as much as you think, and that meat grinder is going to grind away. The thing is though, you as a player already know that you are almost certainly not prepared for such a scenario, and Helldivers plays very directly into that unpreparedness in order to turn almost every one of its encounters into a panicked, desperate flailing for survival. For one, I found it quite surprising just how hostile the game is to players. From the moment you land at your chosen mission site, it's hard not to feel confronted by how barren and unaccommodating these environments are, to the point that even the act of basic navigation can feel treacherous. These aren't worlds of resplendent vistas. Surprisingly often, you're lucky if you can see just more than a few feet in front of you, thanks to ruthless sandstorms or abyssal darkness. Such varied and often limiting visibility renders the numerous, endless threats of this world all the more unsettling, whether it's the constant ground hazards you're having to dodge, or the thing you are really here for, the aliens themselves. Indeed, the main enemies of this game seem handcrafted to lure you into a false sense of security. They aren't exactly the most intelligent creatures you'll come across, but that's part of what makes them scary. You cannot predict their movements, whether the bigger threat is the enemy right next to you that's just standing there for some reason, or the one in the distance that you soon find can close that gap with remarkable urgency. These are enemies whose threat lies in their number rather than their cunning, and on the harder difficulties, especially when different enemy types require different approaches, combined with the aforementioned environmental hazards, it will almost certainly elicit a jumpiness in players that reveals in no uncertain terms that the biggest threat in this world to the safety of you and your teammates is each other. See, a lot of the time, enemy attacks can actually be surprisingly forgiving, allowing you to duck away and pop a stim pack if you have one handy. But a fellow soldier in limited visibility, certain they've got their sights trained on the head of a bug moving in the distance, well, if that bug turns out to be you, you're more than likely going down in one hit. Friendly fire in this game is real, the consequences are sudden. And this is where we get onto one of the game's most genius inclusions, its stratagems. These support items, essentially, can be called down at almost any time within the mission's limit, but require a unique button input to specify which one you want. Sure, it seems like a simple process in a vacuum, but in the heat of battle, when the game doesn't pause while you try to make your selection, chaos can often ensue. Even past the hilarity of calling in an airstrike you think is going to shift the tides in your favour, but in reality ends up just unceremoniously blowing up a teammate, the situation then becomes ludicrously tense. Suddenly you're down a team member, one less body with which to split up the ever-increasing alien hordes. Suddenly you have to frantically fumble with a menu that resembles a series of convoluted cheats, way more than it does a set of military hardware. A move that sees inexperienced players having to stop in the middle of a gunfight as they mess up the Konami code in order to retrieve the teammate they just blasted into oblivion because they couldn't see anything. It's all connected, every element of the design serving to heighten this frenzy, this panic that results in as much comedy as tension. But further, it all contributes to the larger questions the game seems to want you to ask. The hostility of the environmental design, the unpredictability with which these aliens move, it all gets you to wonder, my command tells me we're making progress, that we're liberating the galaxy, but what is it we're actually liberating here? Who are we liberating it from? It seems like these aliens are as confused as we are as to what's going on here. What good actually comes from this, other than more points to spend on more equipment to go and perform the same objectives in similarly unforgiving environments? Also, what are we specifically doing here as these 4 soldiers? Our commanders tell us that we're in for a grueling set of training exercises at the game's start, each a realer deal than the last, and that at the end of it all, we're apparently more than ready to become saviors of the galaxy. But outside of learning the basics of firing a weapon, it seems like we're as prepared for this endless war at the end of training as we were at the start. My pals and I are just a bunch of goofballs. What the hell could we possibly hope to achieve but absolute carnage against ourselves? And this is where we get back to the Starship Troopers comparison. The propaganda doesn't stop, even though we are experiencing the lie in real time. We as players don't act against it because, well, the jingoistic commander told me that the game objective is over there. I'm not just going to leave that incomplete, am I? I mean, what purpose do I serve in this world other than to follow orders and, well, do my part? See, when it comes to most modern military shooters, similar to the propaganda surrounding actual war and conflict itself, a lot of work has to be done in terms of a game's mechanics and systems in order to maintain some kind of cinematic illusion for players. Not just that one lone soldier could single-handedly take down all these hostiles and pull the nation or the world back from the brink of annihilation, but that one lone player could do it. A player of any skill level, no less. As such, many accommodations have come to define the military shooter, ranging from clear sightlines to predictable enemy spawn points, the rigidity of the mission path guiding you from one very set point to another, right through to things like regenerating health and automatic reloads. Now, let me be clear, there's obviously nothing inherently wrong with these mechanics and systems, but in these games, they all serve to hold the player's hand, so that any player can get to see the big explosive set pieces and feel like they played a key part in making those explosions happen. They can feel like the hero of the conflict. But in Helldivers and Starship Troopers alike, there are no heroes, not really at least, despite what the hooting and hollering might suggest to the contrary. Only those who are lucky enough to survive the onslaught of any particular mission. The war is never won, staggeringly little is actually gained, except the potential that success in one battle can further the propaganda efforts back on Earth, that everything is going hunky-dory. And as such, both Helldivers 2 and Starship Troopers prove that you can be 2 things at once. That the outwardly comedic, campy, silly tone of a piece of art can actually emerge from its examination of serious questions and subjects. Starship Troopers is ridiculous, but only because propaganda this blatant shouldn't work. And yet still, to this day, we have people unable to tell that it's satire. If you don't laugh, you cry. And similarly, by parroting all the militaristic swagger associated with more typical modern shooters, but taking away the guardrails of the more overtly cinematic ambitions of those games, and forcing players to drive the inevitable, hilarious chaos of it all, to me, the game actually ends up providing a more compellingly anti-war message through its comedic mechanics and systems than almost any other shooter in recent memory claiming to do so. And so, next time you're somehow miraculously able to bypass the server at capacity screen, and you're smashing the bugs at the behest of your faceless commanders, maybe take some time to consider to what extent you are doing your part. And now the section where I bombard you with propaganda of my very own. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that daft YouTube stuff. It really helps the channel and it means the world. A massive thanks as well to my patrons, who you can see on screen and are all getting access to exclusive, fully produced videos that aren't available here. Your continued support is what allows me to keep going with the work I do on this channel, and I seriously cannot express how grateful I am for that. You are all the best. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Artyom Vitsyuk, Mel Meek, Michael Tritt, Alex O'Sullivan, Rickety Cricket, Cameron Sinisros, Urban Cheese, Charles J. Liu, Alistair Dunn, Vitautis Catharsis, Dolly Bowman, Young Condor, David Karstens, Tom Webster, Danis Sikauskis, Jordan Midler, Christopher Faherty, Nicholas Villeneuve, Yogesh Deshpande, Joe Lanzone, Leah Chinello, Captain Canusprich, Dylan Robinson, Bryce Snyder, CPJ MLT Limited, David Björk, Newin Palacios, Timothy Jones, Carl Christensen, Matthew Grover, Shardfire, Lynn Browning, Dallas Keane, Charlie Kimball, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.